Now, in these settler farms, life was deplorable. So the wages were a pittance. They were literally very low wages, because that was part of the whole capitalist mechanism to extract the maximum value. They needed to give the least wages possible. Although there were other secular trends that also affected the wages, such as the Great Depression, which happened from 1929 onwards, which with the drop of food prices in the commercial international markets, then obviously the farms were much less profitable, and so on and so forth. But that is not to say that if the farms were profitable, their lives would have been any better. Probably not. And there was also this corporal punishment and brutality, so that people had been beaten to death by these colonial masters. That was regular. Corporal punishment actually in Kenya, according to David Anderson, had a particular pain, a particular pang in Kenya, even more than the rest of the British East African Protectorate. For example, in Uganda or in Tanzania, corporal punishment here was on another level. It was like whatever you did, you got a beating along with it. So floggings were regular, with even reports of death. So you can see that that kind of brutality stirred up some agitation, and men like Harry Thuku rose up. He was also partly inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence movement, and inspired a peaceful protest to agitate against this forced land displacement and seizure by the British white settlers, and also to agitate for better political representation, because by then there was a legislative council with literally no African representation, even though they were the majority. And they were also protesting other things like the cultural imperialism. So, you know, with the advent of Christianity, Kikuyu values, the Gikuyu values were being fast erased by this new way of dressing. Gikuyu believed in polygamy, that was erased. Ancestral connections were completely a no-go zone. All these things were an anathema to the white man's religion as it was presented. And so all these things and their way of education came and completely wiped out the Kikuyu way of life and cultural norms. And all those things were being protested, and they wanted to have their own independent churches where they could continue to have their own culture and have and adopt some Christian values, because some of these people actually converted, including Harry Thuku, and they got this education. They were educated in the British system. And so he gave rise to this organization called the East African Association, which later morphed into this Kikuyu Central Association, with notable people like Jomo Kenyatta, the founding father of our nation. And so they decided that they were going to agitate for these rights through constitutional means, and they were relatively effective in terms of what happens after that, because they directly appealed to the emperor, the imperial power in London. So rather than acting through proxies, dealing with colonial administrators here locally, they formed this body of evidence, collected a body of evidence to educate the British powers that be about the tenure systems here, and how that the British could not just arrive and seize land, and kind of all the problems that were ensuing as a result of that. And so Jomo Kenyatta was dispatched, and there was a formation of a land commission in the UK to look into this issue. But nothing changed, and I think we all remember in the 90s when a commission was thrown at every problem, and it was pretty much the same thing. They formed a commission, they had the complaints, and nothing changed after that. The reserves, the land that had been seized was not restored. Labor conditions went from bad to worse. There was the same brutality as before. More white settlers were pouring in, and so on and so forth. So things changed not at all. And that contributed, that was a landmark, that was a watershed moment, because that ended up radicalizing people who realized that, okay, there is no need to use a constitutional means because it's completely impotent in changing anything. And that would later give rise to the Mau Mau movement and more militant agitation